Long before engines, trains, or anything remotely fast, human life had one major limitation. You could only go as fast as your legs are willing to tolerate. And honestly, your legs were not that impressive. Travel between distant places wasn't a journey, it was a full-time commitment. We are talking days, sometimes weeks, just to move between regions that today you could cross in a few hours by car. In comparison, if life is like a high-speed internet, early human travel was basically loading a video at 144p, with buffering in the rain. Back then, survival didn't just depend on strength or intelligence, it depended on endurance. You were limited by biology, and that limitation quietly shaped everything. How far trade could spread, how fast messages could travel, how large civilizations could become. But across the grasslands of Eurasia, something was already moving. Wild herds of horses. Fast, alert, always in motion. To early humans, they weren't allies. They weren't companions, they were just part of the landscape. A very fast, very difficult to catch part of the landscape. For thousands of years, humans and horses shared the same world. But they lived in completely different realities. To horses, humans were just another threat, something to avoid, and to humans, horses were just speedy prey. For a long time, that balance never changed, until slowly it did. One of the most important ideas in horse domestication research is this. It likely didn't start with control, it started with closeness. Humans began to settle in regions where wild horses were already horsing around. No? Nobody? Okay. That means especially open steppe environments. And instead of constantly chasing them, something new began happening. Horses were simply nearby more often. At sites like Botai in Kazakhstan, approximately 5,500 years ago, evidence suggests humans began doing something critical. They may have started managing horse groups more intentionally. This likely included keeping horses within controlled areas, separating younger animals, and selecting individuals that were easier to manage. Nothing here was modern animal training, it was closer to controlled chaos with occasional success. With one of the strongest interpretations of early domestication evidence suggests, horses may have been used for meat and possibly milk. Believe me or not, but that was a thing. Scientists found fat molecules, also called lipids, absorbed into ancient ceramic pots. Lipids are these fatty organic compounds which include fats, oils and steroids. And these two resources were probably the only usage of horses for long years. At some point, someone had what can only be described as a very bold idea.
What if I sit on it?
And just like that, riding was born. Probably with zero safety equipment, no saddle, no stirrups, and very high chance of falling off immediately. Early horseback riding must have looked less like a legend movement and more like a survival challenge. Nevertheless, even limited riding would have provided a significant advantage in mobility, allowing humans to travel faster and more efficiently across the vast landscapes. At some point, humans realized that not every horse had to do the same job. Some of them were stronger, some were faster, some calmer, and instead of letting that go to waste, we leaned into it hard. And that's how horses started splitting in roles, like they were joining different career paths. Horses began pulling loads, carrying riders, and eventually pulling chariots. This wasn't just convenient, it was revolutionary. Trade became more efficient, communication improved, and people could connect over much larger distances than before.
What does it say?
Connection is fun.
Connection is fun, that's it.
And then you have war horses, which are a completely different story. These weren't just strong, they were trained for chaos, fast, disciplined, and able to handle noise, movement, and pure battlefield confusion. A soldier on foot is one thing, but soldier on a horse, that's speed, height, and force combined. One of the earliest major uses of horses in warfare wasn't even direct riding, it was chariots. Civilizations like those in ancient Egypt used horse-drawn chariots to dominate battlefields, and one of the most famous examples is the Battle of Kadesh, around 1274 BCE. Thousands of chariots clashed, turning war into something faster, louder, and far more mobile than before. But chariots had limits. They needed flat terrain, coordination and space, and eventually, mounted warriors, actual riders, began to replace them. Steppe nomads were among the first true masters of horseback warfare. Groups like the Mongols didn't just ride horses, they lived with them. From a young age, they learned to shoot, hunt, and fight while riding at full speed. For them, the horse wasn't just transportation, it was an extension of the body. And then came one of the most feared military forces in history, under Genghis Khan. His armies used fast, highly trained horses to move across enormous distances, striking quickly and disappearing just as fast. Soldiers could even switch between multiple horses to avoid exhaustion, making them almost unstoppable. Entire empires fell because they couldn't keep up. Meanwhile, in Europe, war horses evolved in a different direction. Instead of speed and agility, they focused on power. Knights rode large, heavily built horses into battle, covered in armor alongside their riders. One of the most famous examples of cavalry power comes from the era of Napoleon Bonaparte. His armies relied heavily on fast, disciplined cavalry units that could charge, flank, and chase down enemies with incredible efficiency. Battles during the Napoleonic Wars often featured dramatic cavalry charges that could break enemy lines or turn the tide of a fight in seconds. At this point, life without horses was hard to imagine. Without them, many empires would have never expanded. Continents would have stayed isolated far longer. They simply became the invisible engine of human progress. And for thousands of years, they were the best method of transportation. If you wanted to go fast, you had exactly one option: the horse. That was the peak of technology, no upgrades, no alternatives. Then, along came something that completely changed the rules: the steam engine. It didn't start off as some dramatic, world-changing vehicle. Early versions were just big, clunky machines, used in mines and factories, but inventors like James Watt improved them to the point where they actually became useful.
You know what this needs? Wheels.
And that's how things started getting interesting. Other engineers like George Stephenson began building early locomotives, and in 1825, the Stockton and Darlington railway opening showed the world that steam-powered trains weren't just a crazy idea, they actually worked. This step was revolutionary, and the reason trains took over so quickly is pretty simple. They were better in almost every way. A horse can run fast, but only for a short time before it gets tired. A train? It just keeps going as long as you feed it coal and water. As railways spread across places like the United Kingdom and beyond, the world started to feel smaller. Trips that used to take days on horseback could now be done in hours. But back to the horses, because their journey doesn't end there. They didn't disappear overnight, they were still essential, especially inside cities where trains couldn't go. Later on, however, cars, like Ford Model T, would take over in cities as well, replacing horses in everyday life. Then came a turning point: World War I. At the start of the war, many armies still used cavalry, believing horses would continue to dominate the battlefield as they had for centuries. And for a moment they did. Horses were used for charges, transport and carrying supplies across difficult terrain. But the battlefield had changed. Machine guns, trenches and artillery made traditional cavalry charges incredibly dangerous. Horses could not outrun bullets or explosions, and what once worked for thousands of years suddenly became outdated. Still, horses remained essential for resource transport, so while their role changed, they were far from useless. And after steam engines, after trains, after cars, the horse never truly disappeared. They are still here today, not as the backbone of transportation or warfare, but as something even more symbolic: sport, tradition, culture and connection. You can still see them in racing arenas, in rural farms, in ceremonial parades, and in places where speed doesn't matter anymore, only the relationship between human and animal does. In a world full of engines, the horse became a memory of an animal that helped humans in a way many people don't even realize. They helped build the entire direction of human civilization. So yes, civilization runs on machines now, but for most of its journey, it ran on a living power. Thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, you can support me with a like, and for more videos like this one, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.